Good morning. This is Blaine Pardoe, and this is Writers Fix Problems. Today, we're going to be talking with Herman Hunter about his book, The Revenant in the Tomb. I really enjoyed this book. I want to share a little bit of why I enjoyed this book. And we're just going to talk to the author about what he's working on and things along those lines. So, as we always do, Herman, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me on.
This will be a lot of fun. I'm going to give you a quick review of this book and offer it up for what it's worth. I love the book. It's a great little book, and it really was entertaining for me. So let's jump into a quick review and then have some fun talking author stuff.
All righty.
All right. One of the trends in fantasy for the last few years is authors writing big, bulky books. I'm talking hundreds of pages long. And we've gotten some great books out of that. By the same token, we've gotten some books that were far too long to even capture the essence of their story. I read one book that easily could have been cut into a trilogy, and even then it was too long. And I'm fairly certain I'm not alone in this. Now, one of the reasons I picked up Herman Hunter's The Revenant in the Tomb was that it was short, 152 pages long. Now, working in a small format, Hunter packs in a surprising level of world building and character development. He avoids the temptation to turn this into a much larger tome and kind of keeps the plot simple, along with some fairly diverse and complex characters. He strikes a perfect balance in writing this book. There's a feeling throughout this book that there's more to this story, and the author delivers on that front without extra chapters filled with boring background content. A selling point for me is that the author dodges a lot of the fantasy tropes when it comes to undead and monsters. He creates new terrors, new creatures, and he slides them smoothly into the story. More importantly, the characters carry this book. The plot is amazingly simple, but what makes the story is the characters that are involved. They are, in some cases, races we've never heard of, each with their own motive and a role to play in this greater story. For you non-writers out there, trust me, there's a lot of work to undertake in a story like this. In many respects, this would make a great one-off D&D adventure. And I mean, it does actually start off in a tavern. So in a world of thick books that take forever to forge characters and explain the plot to a reader, The Revenant in the Tomb accomplishes this quickly, easily, and with grace, and I encourage you to pick it up. So that was my review. I hope you found that fair.
Woohoo!
It was great. I love the narrow format of this book is wonderful. I mean, and when I met you at BaseCon and I saw it, I was like immediately drawn to it because I was like, oh my, some of the books I saw were so thick that I was like, okay, I'm going to be reading this for 3 or 4 weeks. And this I got through in 4 days. And I loved that. It was super simple to dive into. What was your thinking around doing this project?
Well, actually, it was supposed to be a free giveaway that failed miserably. You watch those marketing, marketing videos, or read those marketing ideas or tips and tricks. And they say, hey, write a book that's a free giveaway, and and it'll bring people to your website and they'll want to buy your other books. So, and I was already working on another book at the time, So I'm like, okay, I want to draw some people to my website. I want to get them to give me their, their email addresses. So when my next book comes out, I can email them, have hundreds of people that are going to be on that email list. And none of that happened. The reality is that when you are an unknown author, nobody wants to give you nothing. And if you even try and give it away for free, they're not going to take it. So I basically talked to the wife and said, why don't we just publish this thing? And my wife was the one who was doubting whether I should be giving it away in the first place. But I'm like, if I'm going to give a free giveaway, I'm not going to want to give away. I'm going to give something way more than a short story, but not like a whole novel, and a novella was just perfect. And so we decided to publish it, and then later on we decided to do the audiobook. And I really loved the audiobook. I felt I found the right guy for my writing. So Steve Fortune. So we put it out there, and I think I sold about 200 and some copies my first year, which for a guy who's unknown isn't bad. And then the next book came out, which was The Wizard's Stone, and I basically I doubled my sales. Actually, I think more than doubled my sales in about 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
The whole concept of giving the stuff away free, I've dabbled with that myself, and I've never seen it work.
No.
I've heard stories of it working, but
yeah, I stopped listening to I've since stopped listening to writing advice videos. I've stopped listening to book marketing advice videos, and pretty much anything that has the word advice on it. And I've started going to actual, groups where there are larger authors that have, have made it, and working with other smaller groups to see what other people have done, and that seems to be more successful.
well, my publisher right now, one of them, Wargate, they have a great line for this, which is need to go build your tribe.
Yeah.
That's what this is all about, is finding your people and giving them what they want. And it's forced me to make some changes as well. One of the things in Land and Sea that I've been trying to avoid is diving deep into the whole background war that happened, 10 years before all of this. But I can't do it because the fans are going, well, we want to know more about that. So I've got to find a way to kind of strike that balance and address it. And I think I've come up with a way of doing it, but you got to listen to your fans more than listen to other writers.
Exactly. Matter of fact, my beta readers are now my fans. I take a couple of people who've read the book and liked it, and now I'm using them as beta readers because they're the people I want to write for. I don't want to write for other writers because they ain't buying my books. Well, with the exception of you, but yeah. So it's like I don't try to, I try if anybody offers advice, I often listen to it, but in the end, it's the fans that win out entirely.
Well, one of the things that drew me to this book, and I'm going to hold it up here so fans can see it too, was the cover. And I'm a big believer that covers actually sell books. I've often believed that. This one struck me as interesting because it was a fantasy book, but you managed to dodge what I call the trope of fantasy covers, which is the scantily clad barbarian or female on the cover with a sword in hand and a monster that they're facing, clearly in the standoff of battle. We never actually see anybody swing a sword, but we know that's coming, etc.
Yeah.
This one was really cool. So who was the artist for this, and what was your thinking behind the cover?
I don't know the artist. I went to a book service called Ebook Launch, and I basically wrote down and said, I want a cover, and I don't want it to be like everything else out there. And I said I want it to be abstract, and I want elements of the story in there. But the last thing I want is, the main character front and center with their sword and some purple glow behind them, or this fantastical scene. I want a cool looking cover that intrigues them. And they gave me exactly what I wanted. And my wife looked at it, and there was two types that they brought in. They brought the one that I chose. They brought a photorealistic one. My wife really liked the photorealistic one, but I chose the graphic design sort of mashup because I thought it was different than everything else out there. And it picks up. And I tell you, I have received more compliments on that cover than pretty much anything else. Well, maybe the audiobook, but
Well, but you know, people like that, and I think it's important. You know, like I said, you made something that stood out differently,
Mhm.
and it's clear what your intent was because it's easy to go down that path, and I've seen so many horrible self-published fantasy covers too,
Yeah.
where it's like, oh my god, you know, you found a fourth grader with a box of crayons, and you know, this isn't working for me. And I'm drifting more and more. I did Nick Cole's book last time on our show. I'm going more for the abstract covers lately. They
Yeah.
seem to grab me a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, and there's two, I think, two kind of thoughts on it is that, I love the old Frazetta covers for the Conan that you used to see all the time. I love those things. But then you start looking back even further, and you look back at like Tolkien's first, first books. I think the Lord of the Rings books, or maybe it was The Hobbit, where it was just a picture of the lonely mountain, sort of drawn in watercolor, or like the eye, just right on the eye of Sauron, right on the cover, and it's like that stuff's kind of intriguing and it's engaging, and it is something different, and that's sort of the other thing I wanted. I wanted to go a little bit more old school and take, and give the reader something that they haven't seen in a long time. And that's like I said, where I'm kind of going. And there's been a little bit of a, I think a trend in the abstract covers with like, they have thorns and they have all these sort of graphical elements on there with the title. And that was something else I wanted to avoid as well. I wanted something that was plain, direct, and stood out.
Well, and you mentioned the Frazetta covers. I kind of fall into that same boat. Once you show a picture of what the character looks like, you remove the mental picture that
Exactly.
the reader has for that character.
And I think another thing too is that I think when you start putting in scenes and stuff like that, you're basically you're throwing spoilers out there on the cover.
Yeah.
And I'm not 100% sure that that's a good thing. I always want people to be kind of intrigued to go pick up the book and see what's inside. So I think that in itself is a bit of an art form. It's the same way with my blurbs. I've seen some blurbs on Amazon that like basically detail the whole book and the whole magic system and all the cultures of the world, and it's like, number one, I fell asleep reading just the blurb. But at the same time, you're ruining the experience for the reader. Let the reader discover all that for themselves. Add the mystery.
Well, you know, it's fun because covers are important, and you mentioned as well, which is something I really want to touch on a little bit because I think it's an interesting subject, is the audiobooks. And getting the right narrator is important as heck. And I don't think people realize the amount of work it is for the author as part of this whole process too, because you have to audition,
Yeah.
the appropriate narrators. Then when they are done recording, you have to listen to somebody read your book to you
Yep.
and kind of make sure they're striking the right tone. And you don't want to take away their level of creativity, but it's always hard because in your head, you know how these characters sound.
Well, I mean, I do, but it's always nice when you hear them actually come to life, because it's one thing when you hear them in your head, it's another thing when you hear somebody interpret them. And the audiobook narrator, Steve Fortune, the one thing I didn't want out of the audiobook was a very sort of overprocessed, dry sort of narration. I wanted something that had life. And the other thing is that when you write fantasy, I always felt that a Brit, it was always is always required for fantasy. There's something about that English accent that gives it a lot of authority and I think credibility. And I happened upon Steve Fortune. He was the first guy to send me back an audition, and I heard it. I was like, "This is the guy," because he nailed. His voice was older and it had a rougher edge to it, and it meshed so well with my writing. And my wife heard it, and she goes, "This is the guy. Send him the offer." And I'm like, "No, I got other auditions out there." I spent about a tense week hoping to God he didn't move on to something else. So, but yeah, and I feel that the audiobook is probably actually better than the book myself.
I've felt that about a few of my books lately too. The narrator I have is just fantastic, and like I said, it's a lot of work. I don't think people realize as an author, it's like by the time your book comes out, you've read your book 5 or 6 times on top of writing it.
Yep.
Going through the edit process, etc. And then to hear somebody else read it to you, it can be just excruciating because you're like, okay, I know where this story's going. But it's fun, but it's a lot more work than what people realize. I think people don't understand, like, writing the book is actually in some respects the easier part. It's a time consuming part, but it's easier than the actual editing process and getting stuff for narration.
I consider it a soul sucking endeavor that it just drains the life right out of you. Although I do have to admit, in this current book, it isn't as hard. I guess I went through all the toil and travail early on, but it's not as hard with this book, with the current book I'm working on. But yeah, sitting down and going through the audiobook, that takes a long time. And the other thing, in addition to listening to it, make sure that every word is correct, is also listening to see if you don't hear a dog barking in the background.
Right.
So you got to catch all that stray little stuff, little, staticky bits when he speaks because of the voice processing. So yeah, it takes a long time, but it's worth it, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. Well, let me ask you, who are the fantasy authors you're reading right now?
I have absolutely no time to read, literally.
Really?
Yeah. My biggest inspirations were Tolkien, of course, Robert E. Howard. Lovecraft is another one, and you can probably see the Lovecraft influences there in the.
Oh yeah. Now that you mention it, I do.
Yeah. And of course, all the older authors like H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, all of those. And I'm a big advocate, or not advocate. I'm a big but I was a big reader of a lot of historical stuff like Herodotus histories, Beowulf, some of the Norse sagas, all that stuff. And that's the thing that I really, really, truly enjoy. I've started trying to read after writing, trying to read it's very hard for me, because the minute I start listening to somebody else's audiobook or whatnot, I start getting ideas in my head and it ends up ruining the entire experience. So it's like, I picked up the book, The Keep, because it was a Michael Mann movie. And I started listening to it. I couldn't get past the 3rd chapter because I kept coming up with these ideas as I'm driving down the road trying to listen to this book. And the same thing with Paradise Lost, because I had kind of an idea that's going along with Paradise Lost was well, I won't go into much detail on that one, but as I'm sitting there listening to this book, I'm coming up with all these ideas, and I'm like, stop it. So I would like to read more, but the way my brain kind of works, I just can't.
I understand that. I gotta tell you, it's hard for me I read every night for about an hour, but it's really hard to get through a lot of the books.
Exactly.
To do it. And I've learned now recently, I've been asked on 3 different occasions, can you read this book to give us a quote for the back cover? And it's like, okay, it's almost a chore at times, but it's, you want to be fair in doing it. You don't want to read half the book and say, hey, this is a great book. You kind of owe it to people to actually go through the book.
So
That's a challenge.
usually the fastest way I get interested in something is if I actually see the movie, but it's kind of hard with newer authors to actually have a movie to get me interested into reading a book. But I mean, before I actually started writing, that was the one thing that got me back into reading again, because I was doing a lot of traveling, and I write software. I spend a lot of time. I used to spend a lot of time at work writing software, putting in lots of extra time. But I'd also travel, and then I'd pick up a book to fly on the way out, and that's how I got into like the works of C.S. Lewis and Robert E. Howard, who had always been in my orbit, but I never bothered to read at that point. Went back and reread Lord of the Rings. I mean, I burned through all the Tolkien stuff. And then when I got all the way out, and then when I went through all of that stuff, including all the Lovecraft stuff, I was out of books. I didn't know, I tried picking up other people's works, and I wouldn't be able to get through like the first 5 chapters. It just didn't grab me. And some of these were big authors that have these huge fan bases. And it got to the point where I was like, maybe I should start, if I'm going to want to find stuff I want to read, maybe I should start writing my own stuff. So,
Well, it's definitely working. Now, what are you working on right now?
the follow up to The Revenant in the Tomb.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a follow-up.
Yeah, and this one is much larger. I had a lot of people telling me they were upset that it ended too quickly, which I guess is a good thing. And a bunch of people who said, "Oh, I didn't like the ending," because it was too short. Yeah, I haven't figured that one out either. So this one it's about right now it's around 96,000 words. So
That's a
it's
good
gonna
size book.
yeah, it's gonna be a good sized book. So you can't say I didn't give you more. But I would actually like to go back and do a whole series, and I've actually considered maybe breaking this book up into 2 parts and provide 2 smaller books as opposed to one. But I'm not sure I can pull that off.
Yeah, I've seen I've so many books that I've been reading lately. I wish were broken up. They're just so big and chunky.
Yeah.
It's like it actually is. I think it actually prevents people from buying the book.
And that's my concern too. Is I think there's a trend in that there's shorter reads. People want shorter, quicker reads than these huge tomes. And I think a lot of the problems with the huge tomes is there's a lot of info dumping and unnecessary dumping. Info dumping, I guess is the best word. Just there's a lot of unnecessary stuff in there. I like to keep my stuff tight and tense, and keep them going from one to the next, one chapter to the next.
Well, yeah, and I met you at BasedCon, which was a lot of fun.
Oh,
We
yeah.
had a good conversation. What conventions do you hit a year? What do you have coming up?
I've just started. I've been doing a bunch of comic conventions, a lot of small ones. I'm sort of building, kind of getting my feel and then working my way up. I put in for where's the convention at? I put it in for a convention on May 21st. Or no, that was Rise Up. I'm thinking about going to Rise Up. I did a convention up in Houghton Lake, Michigan, which is tiny town.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Jeez,
And
they
that
had
was
a
my first.
convention?
Yeah, they had a convention. They have another one up in West Branch. You used to live in Michigan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. They have another one up in West Branch, so I'm going to go up there and do one as well. And I just put in for another convention, and it's driving me nuts, but it's a local convention. There's going to be one in Clawson, Michigan that I'll probably be going to, and then I'm going to start.
Clawson's outside Detroit, though. So.
Yes, and God, no, it's driving me nuts. I can't get off of where is that comic convention now? It's on my website. I have a calendar there of where I'm going to be at. I also signed up for BaseCon again, so I'm going to be going back there. Apparently I made an impression last time, so I guess I made an impression this time, I guess.
Well,
So,
good.
And but yeah, I want to go to Rise Up. I think down in Tennessee. I think that one's the one on May 21st. Still trying to figure that one out. And there's I want to kind of go to the Writers Cantina. I'm thinking about going to the Writers Cantina in Salt Lake City, Utah, which is in that Writers Dojo group that both you and I are a part of.
I've toyed with that. It's hard for me to spend time with other writers other than this show, though. It's it's a challenge. So before we go much further, how can people connect with you? You mentioned a website. Are you active on social media? What are the ways people can connect with you?
I'm like everywhere. I'm on Twitter. It's at @ or Herman P Hunter 1, because obviously there's another Herman P Hunter out there. I'm also on Facebook. You can find me on Facebook. I have my friends page, and I have the groups page. I'm on Minds with HP Hunter Writer. My website is www.hphunterwriter.com. I'm also on Gab and Getter, although I'm not as active there. And I probably got a couple other sites that I can't even remember. I also have a YouTube channel called Herman P Hunter's The Lore Forge. So I'm everywhere. In fact, I'm pretty spread out. So
well, that's good. Hey, Watcher, have we had any questions come in on YouTube or Rumble?
Let me double check over on Rumble, but I haven't seen any questions over on YouTube yet. Nope. Just there is a $5 here from Lost Core donation saying congrats Blaine on the new grandbaby.
Ah, well, I'll accept the money.
That pays for half a diaper these days.
Yeah, boy, that's changed too. Technologically, they now have a wetness meter on them. I was like, these kids are so freaking spoiled.
What has it got, like Bluetooth connectivity too?
Yeah, it feels like it's got a little gauge. It tells you how wet the diaper is, and I'm like, that's not fair at all.
Back in my parents' day, they used to, it's cloth.
Right.
There was no disposable.
Right. You wanted to check and see if a baby was wet. You held it up and checked.
We did have one answer or one question come in, which is, how do you choose a voice actor for the audiobook?
Well, there you go.
I used Findaway Voices, although I think the process is similar with a lot of other audiobook outlets. Is that they have like a list of voice actors that you can select, and then you ask them to do an audition for you, and they return those auditions back. They either accept it, or they either accept the audition or they don't, and then they return back an audition. And if you like them, then you select them and do your audiobook project. The one thing I personally wanted is somebody who didn't sound like they were an AI voice or some sort of robotic voice. And I think that's important because I've seen other audiobook narrators who have done stuff for like ads and whatnot. And I've heard people in YouTube comments say something like, "Oh, I hate frickin' robot voices or, AI voices." And I was like, okay, that's a good thing to remember. So I wanted somebody whose voice had a lot of character. I wanted some maturity in that voice because my stuff is kind of, heavy and dark, and it probably wouldn't sound as good with a younger man saying, younger man narrating it. So I wanted somebody, it sounded like you were sitting at a pub and he was telling you a tale. And that's pretty much what I got. And, everybody who's heard it has loved the voice actor.
That's good. I mean, it's hard to find the right one, but once you've got a good one, it's worth sticking with them. You do run, so the biggest risk that I've heard from other writers is you do run the risk that they become so associated with your books that it's almost like they take the role of the author, because so much of your market is audiobooks at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And that really changed during COVID, because up to COVID, it was like, gee, 2/3 of what I sold was ebook, 1/3 was print book, very little audiobook. once COVID hit, everybody was downloading audiobooks.
Yep.
And it completely changed the market. It's almost a third at this point.
Well, mine is like 40, 40, 20. So it's 40% audiobooks, 40% ebooks, and 20%, print.
Yeah.
And
It has altered the market.
yeah. And I'm not too upset about that because I like my audiobook.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of it. Or actually, I like both of them, but
I like it. And what I also have heard, and I don't know how accurate this is, but they say people take a look at the length of the audiobook, because if they're going to spend their Audible credits, they want, it's the same to buy a 10-hour book as it is a 2-hour book.
yep.
And they want to buy the 10-hour book because it'll provide them more entertainment. So they're almost buying in bulk in some cases.
Yeah, well, but when you get outside of Audible and you get into other markets like Chirp and Spotify, that dynamic changes. In fact, most of my sales come outside of Audible.
That's great to know.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not really stuck in, I still want the Audible money or, the Audible money, but I'm not tied to them tightly. And that is the one thing that I ran into, that I know I'm running into a problem with the Revenant and the Tomb, is that it is a short book. I mean, the audiobook's only about 4.5 hours, and it's a harder sell in Audible to have somebody buy that when they can go out and, get a 10-hour book for their money.
Right.
So, but whatever, I have my ways around that too.
Well, that's great. Well, I do want to thank you for coming on, Herman. It's been great. The book was fantastic.
Well, thank you.
I really enjoyed it. I'll post the review up on Amazon later today.
Mm-hmm.
I encourage you guys, if you in the world out there where the books are consuming so much of your time, Revenant and the Tomb is so quick and easy to read. And it's amazing to me how much you packed into such a small package. There's a whole lot of world building in there that doesn't delve into a lot of areas that, frankly, I find boring with other readers sometimes.
Yeah. Well, the thing is the world that I have in my head has been around for over 20 years. But the thing is that not every book has to go into great detail about that world. The way I'm writing this stuff is I'm dropping bits and pieces of the world building in each of the books. So it makes it so that as you read more of my books, I reveal more of the world and the overall struggle that's going on in that world. And as a matter of fact, this next book is dumping a bunch of lore for that as it applies to the actual story. So as I go on, you get more and more and more and more of the world, and allows the readers to kind of interact and sort of, I guess, theory craft about what will be coming next, or discussing the lore, or, and doing their own sort of fan base stuff along with it. So that was kind of part of the plan.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being on. Folks, we'll talk to you next week with another author and more questions and fun. Thank you.